All right, good morning. This is my second visit to Moscow, and I'm learning a few cultural things as I go along. This time I learned that I should shake hands with all the men when it's first thing in the morning, so that would take quite a long time for 700 people. The other thing I learned the last time I came is buy an expensive suit. So I did, and I'm wearing it especially for you guys this time. Okay, Kanban, an alternative path to agility. I've been in this space, this thing we call Agile software development, for a long time. 16 and a half years ago, I landed in Singapore to work on a banking project. And while that project was hugely successful, what came out of it was what at the time we described as a lightweight software development method. And 3 years later, those things were renamed as Agile software development methods. So I've been doing this for a long time. So you were asked to remember what are the values of the Agile Manifesto. And while that can be useful for software developers, I often find it just doesn't communicate to anyone else that doesn't do software for a living. And it's sometimes worthwhile to appreciate what was behind the thinking that produced that set of 4 statements. Because if you don't understand that, you can't figure out how to innovate beyond it. So what were Agile methods actually seeking to achieve? So I'm not going to bore you with the Agile Manifesto. But the first idea is that you should make progress with imperfect information. Traditional software engineering that emerged through the 1980s and 90s was based on research done in the 1970s by Barry Boehm at TRW in the United States that produced a paper in 1977 that described the cost of change curve and stated that costs rise exponentially the later in the life cycle you discover a defect or a change that has to be made. That was then included in his 800-page thick book called The Economics of Software Engineering Economics in 1981. And everything from then built on the principle that we should spend a lot of time and energy getting perfect information at the beginning of the project until about the mid-1990s when a number of people realized that wasn't a good trade-off. So the Agile movement rebelled against that. And at the most extreme end, the extreme programming end, the idea was just tell me a story, write it on the back of an index card, and I'll start coding. No need for analysis or design, we'll just write some code, we'll refactor it later. The idea that we make progress with imperfect information, it's cheaper to correct later than try to be perfect up front. The next thing is enable a high-trust culture. In fact, you could go as far as to say Agile software development methods assume that you have a high-trust culture in your organization. And that's a terribly big assumption, particularly in cultures like Russia, or Brazil, or China, or India, or France, or Southern Europe, or most of Eastern Europe. There are very few high-trust countries on the planet. Sweden, the Netherlands, Japan. Interestingly, Japan, a place that hasn't really embraced Agile software development, despite the fact it's a high-trust culture. But Agile software development assumes that you have a high-trust culture in your organization. Well, how do you create that when you don't have one in the environment that's around you? That's a tough ask. The next thing is that you should treat work in progress as if it were a liability rather than an asset. In other words, we don't want to have too much of it hanging around. We don't want to have too much of it in progress. We don't want it to take too long. We don't want the batch sizes to be too big. So we want small batches that we can finish quickly and deliver, and we don't want large quantities of unfinished work perishing in our environment. Because one of the great fallacies of the earlier software engineering era was the idea that partially completed work could be persistently stored, that we could check it into version control, that we could write requirement documents, we could store those in repositories, we could shelve them, leave them on the shelf for weeks, months, perhaps years, pull it off the shelf later and nothing has changed. And that's really a fallacy. Knowledge work perishes because the external environment is constantly changing on us, and because we're not good at persistently storing knowledge. Stuff that's in our head, when we write it down and try to store it somewhere, there is an attenuation of the quality of the signal from what's in our head to what gets stored. And when someone comes and reads it back, there's a further attenuation in the signal because they're not perfect at interpretation. So a lot of what we know is in here. Chemical computer inside, no digital storage, no Intel processor. There is a loss of information every minute, hour, day that goes by from when you think of something to when you use it. Next thing is you should create feedback loops. The Agile movement believes that the world is too complex to design a solution to it, so you have to let your solution evolve in real time. That was a good principle. It's not worked out so well in practice, because most Agile people that get on stages like this with me will tell you that if you're not doing it according to the textbook, you're not doing it properly. And you should spend your time trying to get better at doing it properly before you're good enough to think about changing it and doing it differently. I find that a rather arrogant approach, and it also defeats the principle. If the world's really so complex, how can you be so arrogant as to say, all right, we've got 700 people in the audience here, the one solution fits all of you in all of your situations, in all of your companies, and all of your projects? That's obviously wrong. It's much more important that we get back to this first principle. The world's too complex and we need to have feedback loops in our organizations, and our processes need to evolve and be tailored to the specific situation in order to be fit for purpose. And lastly, the Agile movement embraced a combination of a craftsmanship ethic and a professionalism ethic. The idea that your software should be beautifully crafted, it should be professionally developed with a lot of professional pride, and that it should have many attributes like loose coupling and highly cohesive. But to make that trendy, we had to come up with new words for it, like refactoring, because otherwise people might have thought it was good old-fashioned software engineering, and we'd come to the conclusion that that must be the enemy. So that was the Agile movement, and I'm sure that everyone in the beginning had the best intentions. Well, here we are, what is that now, 13 years later, and while there's a lot of people doing Agile development, I don't hear a lot of executives in big companies telling me it's made that big of a difference to their organization. And you might ask the question, why not? I think because it's been focused on doing Agile as a thing and not the original principle, which was improving the agility of IT organizations and potentially the whole business. And my personal interest has been about improving the agility of businesses that use high technology. There's no point in having an IT department just for the heck of it. You guys don't get employed to come to work and have fun with ones and zeros all day. and then and hang out with other like-minded people who like to have fun with ones and zeros. You get paid to improve the economic performance of the businesses that employ you. And if your IT work isn't doing that, then there's a problem. So we need to start thinking about what we do as part of the bigger business environment that we're in, and think about how we improve the agility of those businesses. This diagram shows the old 20th century industrial engineering model. It's based on the 18th century model of capitalism, that the capitalists owned the money to have the plant and machinery, but they quickly realized that they weren't smart enough necessarily to run the businesses, so they employed professional managers. By the 20th century, the managers realized they weren't smart enough to figure out what the workers should be doing, so they employed industrial engineers to figure out what the workers should do. The industrial engineers defined the processes, the managers told the workers to follow the process, and a good worker did what he was told. We still use this model for software engineering practices, but nowadays those industrial engineers are called agile coaches. This model is fundamentally wrong. It doesn't work in the 21st century. It doesn't work for knowledge work industries. It's based on a model that came out of an era between 1900 and 1925 and evolved in steel factories and car manufacturing. How many of you are working in a steel factory or a car manufacturing plant? We actually have one in the audience. Good for you. You're in the IT department of that steel factory, aren't you? He's nodding. Okay. That's what the pop-up says. This is really the modern model. All knowledge workers are managers of something. Maybe it's just the version control system. Maybe it's just a few files that get checked into that version control system. Every knowledge worker, by definition, makes decisions for a living. And those decisions can affect the bottom line performance of their business. This is not me saying this. This is Peter Drucker, the late Peter Drucker. And he said it back in 1961. That's one heck of a long time ago for someone to figure out that knowledge work was not an industrial process and shouldn't be managed that way. So managers and workers need to control and evolve their processes. And maybe there is a role for process coaches to facilitate that, to facilitate the practices of evolving the process and the learning that comes from it. But really, if you need to have feedback loops, your process coach shouldn't be the designer. Are they smart enough to design something that sufficiently deals with the complexity in your organization? I personally don't think so. And are they smart enough to come up with one single process definition that they write in a book and then suggest that all of you should copy it? That is nonsense in the modern world. So what we're talking about is the idea that all knowledge workers are managers of something, whether they have that in their title or their pay grade. And if they're managers of something, it would be a good idea if we gave them some management training. They got plenty of training in doing software development, but probably not very much management training. In fact, most managers in knowledge work organizations get almost no management training. Usually it's some legal minimum that says, teaches you how not to get the company into any trouble, how not to get sued, and how to do some sort of annual appraisal for your workers. And if you're lucky, maybe your company will sponsor you to do some sort of master's degree, maybe an MBA, and they think that's a proxy for management training. Later today, some of you will feel the need for a good cup of coffee. You might even find a nearby Starbucks and queue up and buy a cup of coffee there. I guarantee you that that cafe is better managed than your IT department. Because the manager of the cafe knows what business he's in, he knows what he's serving, he knows the business risks associated with that, he knows what customers care about, he understands how to improve customer service, and he takes action appropriately in order to do it. The hotel bar outside the conference centre here, down in the Crown Plaza, will almost certainly be better managed than your IT department. The interesting thing is that the manager of both the Starbucks and the hotel bar have less education than all the managers in your IT department. Something is badly wrong with our profession. We promote people into management decisions, they don't even know what business they're in. Right. So what business are you in? What service are you providing? Who are your customers? What do they ask you for? What's the nature of the demand, the arrival rate and the pattern of the demand? I'll bet the Starbucks manager can tell you that. He can tell you when people come in, how many people come in, what the rate is, what type of services they ask for, whether it's an espresso drink or not. All of these things matter to how he manages his business. Almost all managers in the tech sector that I meet cannot answer these questions when I first meet them. If you know all that, what risks are associated with those requests? What do you do to the requests, and where does the finished work go? That seems a little bit easier, but most managers can't tell me the risks associated with the work that's coming in. We tend to treat it very homogeneously. So the Kanban method is about fixing all this. It just so happens that Kanban systems are part of it. It is not a project management method or a software engineering development lifecycle or an agile software development method. It is an approach to managing a creative knowledge work services organization. It just so happens to use virtual Kanban systems and visual boards. And it will create an adaptive capability in your organization because it has feedback loops that help you evolve every individual service delivery to improve the service that's being provided, improve customer satisfaction, and make both the service and the bigger organization fitter for purpose. So the idea is that you take what you do now and you Kanbanize it, and you give the workers and the managers some management training so they know what the heck they're doing, what business they're in, what people ask for, how often they ask for it, what the business risks are associated with those things, how that affects the way you process them, how you process them, and where they go when they're finished. And if you get good at doing that stuff, things get dramatically better. There's a lot of case studies in our community now, some of which show 800% productivity improvements. One from Hewlett-Packard's printer firmware division, another one from the BBC's website development. And those are just the two at the high end of the scale. If I read a case study nowadays and it only shows, 200% improvement, I think, that's not so good. 400% is maybe normal. There's a fairly recent, very big case study from Siemens Healthcare in the United States. They're very proud of it. It's about 40% productivity improvement from that. They think that's good. I think they've left a tremendous amount of opportunity on the table. There's a big room for improvement there still. The word Kanban has two meanings in Japanese. It only has one meaning in Chinese. This has caused me some problems. Kanban in Japanese, written with their alphabet, the hiragana, means signal card. And written using the Chinese alphabet, the kanji alphabet in Japanese, it means sign or board. And of course, naturally, written in Chinese, using Chinese characters, it means sign or board. This is a problem because what I was doing was inspired by Toyota, where they use Kanban systems and they write it in hiragana. But then at some point in January 2007, a manager who worked for me said, we're not seeing all the improvement we'd like to see. Let's put a board on the wall with some sticky notes on it to visualize the process. And since then, a lot of people have come to believe the board on the wall with the sticky notes is the Kanban. And I used to fight that argument until I went to China and realized that for them, it is the Kanban. They don't actually understand the concept of the signal cards. I'll come back to this slide later. It's repeated later on. So what's a Kanban system? Here's one in operation. Notice there's no board on the wall with sticky notes. The Kanban is the plastic card in the top left-hand side as you're looking. And that is a signal card. And in this example, it signals the permission of these people to be inside this park, which is the Imperial Palace Gardens in the center of Tokyo. All of the people sitting having a picnic will have one of these cards in their pocket, and when they leave, they have to return the card to the kiosk in the picture in the bottom left. They don't pay for this admission ticket. They are given it as they enter and they return it when they leave. What's happening with these cards is they're controlling the number of people inside the park. The signal cards control the people in progress so that the park doesn't become overcrowded. This is the same principle that Toyota use to limit the inventory inside their factories and ensure that components and inventory arrive just in time. I understand that that term just in time doesn't translate so well in Russian. I was told that yesterday. But hopefully you understand the English. Kanban systems are pull systems, therefore. So here we have a visualization of a pretty typical looking software development. And if we watch this, sorry, I need to turn my back here to see this. The Kanban are the numbers at the top. So there's capacity here in test ready. That means we can pull this thing that's finished in development. And items flow through like this. They get pulled when there is a signal to pull it. So it's a pull system. These Kanban are therefore virtual, they're not physical. There's no plastic card saying admission ticket. So back in 2005 and 6 when I started to document this, I described it as the use of virtual Kanban systems for software engineering. It's expanded quite a bit since then as a concept and a method. So these are the virtual Kanban at the top. The Kanban could be physical. This picture is an equivalent of the previous picture. Imagine this is a magnetic whiteboard. These colored circles are magnets, the magnets holding the ticket. The magnets, therefore, are the Kanban. We have 5, we have 3 here, we have 5 here, we have 3. Oh, there's an extra one. Why is that? Well, that's because this one has been marked as blocked, because the people testing ticket A have been asked to test this ticket I, which is urgent. So they've actually decided to break the Kanban limit by introducing an additional Kanban. It's like printing money for those of you who work in banks. Quantitative easing. Extending the number of Kanban in the system, in this case for a temporary period of time. The next critical thing to understand with a Kanban system is that by definition, it means commitment is deferred. That if something's not on the Kanban board, if it's not in the Kanban system, then it's not been committed yet. The idea of commitment implies that the customer has said, we really, really want this. And the development or the service delivery side have said, if you really, really want it, we'll agree to really, really do it for you. A consultant from the United Kingdom, management consultant and author called Stephen Bungay, refers to this point in time as the Spice Girls question. Because you ask the customer, tell me what you want, what you really, really want, and they replenish this input buffer with the things they really want. That is the commitment point. So we make the commitment point very explicit when you do Kanban. This is really painful and difficult for organizations. It's almost certainly the #1 reason why most Kanban adoption in the world is very shallow and wouldn't really qualify as proper Kanban. We have a separate name for that. We call it proto-Kanban, where there really aren't Kanban limits and it's not a real pull system. It's a board on the wall with some sticky notes on it. But people like to call it Kanban because they like to be trendy and fashionable. Right, so the idea is that if we commit on something, we wish to avoid aborting it afterwards. That's just waste. And if we have to abort something, the implication is the customer wasn't sure that they really, really wanted it. Well, if they weren't sure, they shouldn't have asked for it. And hopefully they'll learn that lesson in the future. There's a learning loop there. That's a feedback opportunity. And the ideas, the things upstream of the Kanban board, they remain optional and ideally unprioritized. Prioritizing a backlog of options, a pool of ideas, is waste, because however you prioritized them last week, if I call you to a meeting today and say, tell me what you want, what you really, really want today, it will probably turn out to be different from whatever you prioritized last week. So why did you waste your time and energy prioritizing it? You'll see why I'm unpopular in the Agile community. People, Agile zealots and religious Agile people, they hate this stuff because I'm largely pointing out that a lot of Agile dogma is just that. It is dogma. It's practice that people do because they were told to do it in a class or read it in a book. It is not helping them manage their business better. I've spent more than a decade being unpopular in the Agile community, so I don't feel bad about it. I think it's healthy that there is someone in the community that's willing to question all this dogma. So, discard rates are often high. How do you get people to understand that deferred commitment's a good idea? Well, you go and ask them, how many of the ideas you came up with did we actually implement? The first ever Kanban system we did was at Microsoft. And that particular department discarded 48% of the change requests that were submitted by the customers. In other words, the fact the customer submitted it does not represent a commitment, because 48% of the time, those things were thrown away before they were developed or tested. In order to understand how you're managing your organization, you need to figure out how much stuff you're discarding. Most organizations don't even measure this. They perhaps don't even have the means to measure it because they never close anything. The customer submits it into the Jira system to support our Atlassian sponsor at the conference. And the customer thinks it's committed. They go back to their colleagues and say, I've submitted it in Jira, IT is working on it. Some of those things could be years old and you've never touched them. Go find out how many of them are effectively abandoned and figure out what your discard rate is. Show that to the customers and point out to them that early commitment is a bad idea. Oh, and how much energy did you waste prioritizing all those things? Again and again and again and again. over months and years. You're not even touching them. Upstream Kanban prepares options. What I've done here is I've slid the Kanban board this way, and the commitment point is now in the middle. So what we have is the upstream process to the left-hand side. And that upstream process starts with ideas, and then perhaps we do some development of the ideas to decide whether they're good ideas or not. So we do some business case, we might analyze the requirements, and gradually we work the way to the point where we might commit on them. At every stage in this process, these options can get discarded. While upstream Kanban tend to have minimum and maximum limits, the point is to ensure that we always have enough options to choose for the downstream process. If we need 4 in our committed buffer, we need at least 4 in ready for engineering. And if we think there'll be a high discard rate here, we need choices. We need options to choose from so that we've got choices for what's the best thing to start right now, based on everything we understand about our current business environment. If we need 12 of those, then upstream from that, we need at least 12. And if we think that we might throw about half of those ideas away, then maybe we have 24 here. And if we need up to 24 here, we need at least 24 in the previous stage. And at all stages along here, we will throw things away. Meanwhile, there is a cost to acquiring these options. The bankers in the room will begin to recognize this stuff. This is real option theory in action. And most organizations do not have good governance over this upstream process. They don't know how many options they're creating. They don't know the cost of the creation of the options. They don't know the discard rate. And those of you that work in industries that manage risk for a living, like the oil and gas industry or the finance industry, will now realize that the business you're in, you manage that pretty good. Your IT department, on the other hand, not so much. The same theory is not being applied, but it's actually quite easy to do if you implement Kanban system in a visualization like this. And when I showed this to a very senior executive at a very big bank here in Moscow last year, a head of retail banking, he lit up with this. This was an epiphany for him. It explained why he employed more people to create more ideas than the IT department was capable of implementing. It had never occurred to him before. It gave that bank a whole new way of managing how they feed ideas into their IT organization. The next thing we need to consider with a Kanban system is how often do we replenish this input buffer? How often do we make commitments? And the factors involved in that are the coordination cost of holding the meeting, the transaction cost of holding the meeting, and the information arrival rate. If no one knows anything new since we held the last meeting, we may as well just have made the buffer bigger and committed to more things earlier. So if information doesn't arrive very often in your organization, maybe the steel factory, for example, then you don't need to hold these meetings too often. On the other hand, if information arrives very rapidly in your organization, maybe you're a news website, media company that receives breaking news or follows political events, then in that world, maybe you need to do replenishment once or twice a day. You need to replenish a lot more often. So the information arrival rate is critical, but the cost of holding the meeting is the balancing factor. If information arrives rapidly, but the meeting's expensive, you can't hold it too often, and that's bad. It means you're going to commit to stuff that you weren't sure about, and the result will be that your abort rate will be higher. It's an incentive to make the cost of holding the meeting cheaper so you can hold the meeting more often so that you abort less things. The more frequent you hold this meeting, the more agile your business is. And the most agile, oh, we have 5 minutes remaining, huh? Right, delivery frequency. How often do we do deliveries? And the more often we do deliveries, the more agile we are. And the less often, the less agile. If we could do delivery on demand, that's the most agile we could be. We'll skip this one. What I want is the system lead time here. Whoa. How long does it take from when we commit to when something exits the Kanban system? And that's the third element in figuring out our agility. So the frequency we give the business to make decisions, the length of time it takes us to convert that decision into a deliverable, and our ability to deliver the finished work frequently, together that makes us more responsive to the business environment we're living in. So by designing your Kanban system and the way your organization works to optimize these three things, you tune the way you respond to the business environment you're in. Now, this is fundamentally different from Agile software development methods because they couple together the replenishment, the lead time, and the delivery rate into time boxes. So the cadence of replenishment, the cadence of delivery, and the lead time are all the same, maybe every 2 weeks, for example. That isn't always appropriate. In fact, my guess is for 80% of businesses, coupling those three ideas together is not appropriate. So you want to decouple them so that you can tune the way you respond to the business environment you're in, and a Kanban system enables you to do that. This is the first and fundamental reason that Kanban wasn't popular in the Agile community, because it gets at one of the dogmatic practices, time-boxed iterations. Interestingly, the Agile Manifesto says nothing about time-boxed iterations. They do not appear in the Agile Manifesto. Right? The use of them as a practice in the Agile community is dogma. We get the Agile lead time, the lead time for the Kanban system, and it gives us the right result for this queuing theory equation known as Little's Law. This is the equation. The amount of work in progress divided by the average lead time gives us the average delivery rate. This is the geometry on what's called a cumulative flow diagram. So this is ideas that were submitted. This is when we started them. This is when we finished them. The height between started and finished is the work in progress. The horizontal distance between started and finished is the average lead time, and therefore, quite evidently, the slope between the 2 points is the average delivery rate. You won't ever find me using the word velocity. Right. This allows us to do forecasting, and because the WIP is fixed, this Little's Law equation works fairly well in knowledge work, and it allows us to forecast quite large projects with some accuracy. The customer lead time, of course, is the Kanban system lead time plus whatever batch transfers we might have on the exit side. So that's just a definition. We'll fit this into the remaining few minutes, this one. Flow efficiency. This went out of fashion in the Kanban community in 2008. It went out of fashion because I decided it wasn't very useful for provoking improvement. However, it's back in fashion again, and in a big way. So flow efficiency is the idea that the total customer lead time here consists of periods where the work is waiting and being delayed, and periods where it's being worked. And if we can divide the working time by the lead time times 100%, that's our flow efficiency percentage. What do you think a typical flow efficiency would be for an IT organization? Manufacturing industry gets this up into the 80 to 90% range typically. But what about us? Well, I used to think 5 to 15% was typical for companies that I met. But in some recent times, some guys in our community, Zolt Verbok from Budapest and Håkan Fors from Stockholm, have been reporting real data. And the real data is in the range of 1 to 5%. It's really quite shocking. So why is this important? Well, if you're 5% flow efficient, let's get rid of the pop-ups. Imagine this customer lead time is 100 days. That means you only spend 5 days working on the item. Imagine 2.5 of those days are development and the other 2.5 are testing. So we're not going fast enough, and your big boss says, oh, these software developers we've got, they must be complete bozos. Let's fire them and replace them with these new guys from this outsourced company that I met at a conference recently. Apparently their guys are 10 times faster than the idiots who work for us. So we get rid of all the idiots who work for us, we hire the new guys, they're 10 times faster. How much faster does the organization get? You take 2.5 days, you make it 10 times faster, it becomes quarter of a day. The lead time becomes 97 3/4 days. The flow efficiency, the delivery rate coming out of the organization goes up by 2%. If you're 5% flow efficient and you make your software developers 10 times faster, you improve the performance of your organization by 2%. That's pretty shocking. In my line of work, I meet senior executives at very big companies. One of them from a very big company in Britain, the chief financial officer told me, David, we've spent 14 million British pounds training 2,200 people in something called extreme programming. And from where I'm sitting, it appears to make no difference at all to the performance of our company. That company probably had a flow efficiency of about 1%. What they did is make the 1% really, really good. If you don't understand your flow efficiency, you don't know what problem you're solving. If you have very high flow efficiency, improving the software developers will make a big difference. If you have low flow efficiency, what you need to do is focus on the sources of delay. And eliminating all these delays is a management job. The workers doing the work in these columns, like the developers and the testers, it's not their job to figure out how to get rid of the delays. If you don't train your managers, first of all, to understand what problem are they solving and how to go about solving it, things will not get better. So there is a huge argument to say Agile software development's really cool. Developers like it, testers like it, but it's not necessarily solving the problem that improves business agility for high-tech companies. And until you start measuring this metric and understanding it, you won't know whether Agile software development's really going to make a big difference to your business. So I'm kind of out of time here. We'll just look at this. Lead time histograms that then produce lead time distribution curves. The most important metric in Kanban. Understanding how long it takes you to finish something. The lead time, not the working time. I had 2 groups in my class yesterday tried to convert this into story points. But remember, 95% of it was probably delay. Why would you allocate a story point to a period of delay? That was nonsensical to me. Understanding this stuff is really important because it communicates your sensitivity to risk. It is the main risk management tool in Kanban. It's the most important metric. And for the Atlassian guys in the room, your product doesn't produce this chart. If you want me to start recommending it as a Kanban tool, you need to start implementing things that Kanban training and method cares about. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. The slides will be on Twitter. I'll tweet the link, and the slides will be on Dropbox, and you can pull them down and see the rest of the stuff that you didn't get to see. And we will actually stop at that point. Thank you all for your attention, those of you who stayed in the room to listen. About half the people in the room left, which is an indication just how much the Agile community hates Kanban. Thank you. Oh, apparently we have time for questions.
А я буду на русском задавать вопрос. Вы их слышите хорошо?
Слышно, только он не поймет.
Ну, я могу отдать микрофон, или он оденет переводчик. Как лучше?
Is someone going to translate the question for me?
David, hello. Hello, everyone. David, my name is Stas. I'm from Kaspersky Lab, and can you ask Microsoft, please, include in the next version of Team Foundation Service a flexible Kanban boards?
Oh, you know, I probably asked them for that in 2005 when I worked there.
Yes or no?
It is a good point that Team Foundation Server is not very flexible. They do have some Kanban templates in there, which is good for getting you started, but it's fundamentally the architecture of the product that's the problem. I did a blog post on this stuff many years ago called Team Frustration Server, and if anyone's interested, you can Google that. It was described by the Microsoft people themselves as a very balanced opinion. Okay, so there was the question that I couldn't translate.
Да, спасибо большое. Я работаю в фирме, которая производит программное обеспечение для многих миллионов пользователей и отвечает за уплату налогов в итоге. Вопрос такой. Вот вы говорите, с одной стороны, что хотелось бы использовать неполную информацию, чтобы двигаться быстрее. С другой стороны, вы говорите, вот хорошо кафе, они хорошо знают риски, хорошо понимают своих клиентов. Вопрос. Вот у нас тоже бывают такие ситуации, когда именно на этапе анализа зависание задач происходит, когда мы хотим получить больше информации, точнее о пользователях. Что бы вы посоветовали делать в первую очередь? Поскольку вот мне кажется, это здесь есть противоречие. Использовать неполную информацию и хорошо понимать своих клиентов.
I'll try to translate that.
Okay, no, I heard the translation in my headset. So I summarized the understanding of the Agile movement at the beginning. What I really failed to say was that Kanban is largely agnostic to that. You could take your situation where you want more information up front, you can still Kanbanize that process, and you can still find ways of improving its agility without necessarily sacrificing that information discovery at the beginning. That I didn't have time to spend today talking about how we do business risk analysis coupled with Kanban. And doing that and exposing it in the Kanban system is a way of understanding things like what should you start now, what should be deferred until later, and what shouldn't be done at all. Well, things where you need a lot of upfront information, you probably have to start them early, and you need a process that gathers the information. And you know, that upstream Kanban where you decide if you're doing it or whether you're discarding things. That there is a very famous example in your field, a company that does finance and human resource software, including taxation software, called Ultimate. Ultimate Software from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They've been using Kanban for 5 or 6 years. They're a sponsor of our American conference every year. And I'm happy to introduce them to you if you would like to understand how Ultimate have used Kanban to help them deliver taxation software better. Any more questions?
Все, нет вопросов, да? Давайте поблагодарим нашего докладчика. Приятно видеть человека, который проехал через океан, чтобы рассказать нам все это. Следующий докладчик у нас